You owe the association $3, and until it is paid, your account is delinquent and your voting rights are suspended. That was Diane Halpern, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on my front walk with a clipboard and a printed notice, telling me my mailbox post had been measured at 1 inch too tall and was now subject to a $3 correction fee. She said it the way some people read a verdict. My wife Ellen had planted the daylilies along that walk the spring before she passed, and Diane was standing on them in her white kitten heels, and she did not notice, and she did not care. What Diane did not know, what she never once thought to check in the 4 years she spent escalating a $3 fine, was that I had spent 31 years as a certified public accountant specializing in nonprofit and association audits, and I had already read every page of the Cedar Hollow financial records she assumed no one would ever ask to see. So when she handed me that notice, I did not argue. I took it, I thanked her, and I filed it. If a woman planted a flag on your late wife's flowers and told you that you owed $3, what would you have done? My name is Walter Voss. I was 62 years old that morning, and I had lived in the third house on Cedar Hollow Lane for 11 years. Ellen and I bought it after I sold my practice, a single-story brick place on 1/3 of an acre, with a workshop out back where I kept my files and my coffee and a radio that only got 2 stations. We picked Cedar Hollow because it was quiet, because the lots were large, and because the HOA dues were low, only $40 a month. Which should have told me something but did not at the time. Ellen loved the back garden. I loved the workshop. We had a daughter, grown and gone, and a granddaughter named Mia, who was 15 that year and came to stay with me every summer after Ellen died, because she said the house got too quiet for one person, and she was right. I want to tell you about the records, because the records are the whole story. When you audit associations for 3 decades, you learn that the fraud is almost never clever. It is boring. It is a board president who controls the checkbook and the meeting minutes and the mailing list, and a membership that never reads anything, and a management company that bills for work it does not do. I had seen it 40 or 50 times across my career. In condominium towers and lakefront subdivisions, and one memorable mountain golf community, where the treasurer had paid himself a salary for a job that did not exist. The pattern never changed. One person held all 3 keys, the money, the minutes, and the mailing list. And as long as that person held all 3, the membership could be robbed in slow motion for years, never feel the hand in their pocket. I knew the shape of it the way a roofer knows a soft spot by the give underfoot. You do not have to pull up the shingles. You just have to walk the roof and feel where it sags. And Cedar Hollow had the give. I had felt it the first time I read the annual budget summary, the one document the association mailed to every owner each January. It was a single page, no line items, no detail. A figure for income, a figure for expenses, a figure for the reserve, and a closing balance, all rounded to the nearest 1,000, signed only by Diane. A real budget for a 100-home association runs 10 or 15 pages and breaks every category down to the dollar. Because that is what owners are entitled to, and that is what an honest treasurer is proud to show. A 1-page summary signed by one person is not a budget. It is a curtain. I had hung that page on a nail above my workbench the first January I lived there, not because I suspected anything yet, but because 31 years of habit would not let me throw away a financial statement that did not add up. It hung there for years, going yellow, while I waited without knowing I was waiting. I have to explain what I mean by waiting, because it sounds like patience, and it was not exactly patience. An auditor cannot accuse. An auditor can only document, and then let the documents accuse on his behalf. I could have stood up at any meeting in those first years and said the budget was a curtain, And Diane would have smiled and called me a confused old man, and the room would have agreed with her, because she was charming and certain, and I was the new widower who kept to his workshop. Suspicion is not evidence. A feeling under your boots is not a hole in the roof. So I did what my whole career had trained me to do. I kept the page on the nail, and I kept my mouth shut. And I waited for Diane to do something in writing that I could not have invented and she could not explain. The first notice came on a Tuesday in March, the year Mia turned 12. It was a violation letter, printed on association letterhead, for a trash can left at the curb past noon on collection day. $5 fine. The collection truck had come late that day, after 1 in the afternoon, and I had been in the workshop and had not heard it. And the can sat at the curb an extra 2 hours. Diane must have driven past, because the notice cited the time to the minute, 1:47 in the afternoon, as though she had sat at the end of the lane with a stopwatch. I rolled the can back. I paid the $5 by check. I made a copy of the check and a copy of the letter, and I put both in a manila folder, and on the tab I wrote the date in pencil. I did not think much of it then. I thought it was an overzealous neighbor with a title and too much free time. I was wrong about the overzealous part. It was not zeal. Zeal burns out. This did not burn out. It was a system, and systems are patient, and so was I. I should tell you how Diane delivered things, because the delivery was half the message. She did not mail the notices, though mailing would have been easier. She walked them up to the door herself, in the magenta blazer, with the clipboard held against her chest like a breastplate. And she would knock and wait and hand you the page in person so she could watch your face while you read it. The first time she did it to me, she stood on the walk and said, "The association has standards, Mr. Voss, and standards are what protect everyone's investment." I said the truck had been late. She said, "The standard is noon." And she smiled the way you smile at a child who has offered a poor excuse. And she turned and walked back to the white SUV. I stood there holding a $5 fine and a daylily she had crushed under her heel without noticing. And I did the math on the kind of person who watches your face while you read a fine. And I went back inside and started the spreadsheet that night. Diane Halpern was about 50 that year, trim and sharp, with a tight blonde bob and sunglasses she kept pushed up on her head, even indoors. She drove a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate, and she wore a magenta blazer to every interaction, whether it was a board meeting or a walk down the lane with her clipboard. Her husband, Ron Halpern, ran a development company called Halpern Land Partners out of an office 2 towns over. I did not know that mattered yet. I only knew Ron as the man who waved from the SUV and never got out of it. The second notice came in April. My recycling bin was the wrong shade of blue. The covenant, Diane wrote, required a uniform municipal blue, and mine was a darker navy I had bought at the hardware store because the municipal bins were always out of stock. $10 fine. I bought the correct bin. I paid the $10 by check. I copied both. The third came in May, for a garden hose visible from the street, coiled on a hook beside the spigot where it had hung for 11 years and where Ellen had hung it before me. $15. I moved the hose into the workshop and paid the $15 and copied both. By June, there had been 4 notices in 4 months, and the fines had climbed 5, 10, 15, 20 in a tidy arithmetic stare. And I had paid everyone by check, and I had a copy of every check and every letter in the folder. And the spreadsheet at my workbench had grown 3 clean columns: date, violation, amount. I was not angry yet. I want to be honest about that because people expect the anger, and there was not much of it in those first months. I was curious, professionally curious, because in 31 years of audits, I had learned that when fines start arriving in a tidy escalating sequence, in even increments, on 100-home association with low dues and a one-page budget, somebody is not enforcing rules to protect anyone's investment. Somebody is generating revenue and writing down the reason on letterhead and signing it. That summer, Mia asked me why the flower lady kept coming around. That is what she called Diane, the flower lady, because the first time she saw her, Diane had been standing in Ellen's daylilies again, clipboard up, pointing at the mailbox post and writing something down. Mia had watched from the front window the whole time. When Diane drove off, Mia came and found me in the workshop and asked, "Why does the flower lady get to tell us what to do?" It was a better question than most adults would have asked. I told her that some people like to be in charge of things, and that being in charge was a feeling they chased the way other people chased money or quiet, and that the trick was to never let them make you angry, because angry people make mistakes and careful people keep receipts. Mia thought about that, turning it over the way she turned over everything. And then she asked if she could help me keep the receipts. I gave her the job of scanning each letter on the workshop printer and saving it to a folder on the drive, named by date, the way I named the paper folders. She was 12, and she took it more seriously than some staff accountants I had supervised. She named the drive folder Operation Mailbox, and I told her that was premature, because the mailbox fight had not happened yet. And she said, "It will, Grandpa. She is going to run out of normal things to fine you for." She was 14 months early and exactly right. It happened the next spring. Diane sent a notice that my mailbox post stood at 57 inches when the covenant allowed 56, and that the violation carried a correction fee of $3. I measured the post myself. It was 56.5 inches, which is to say it was within rounding of the limit and well inside any reasonable tolerance. But the covenant did not mention tolerance, and Diane did not believe in it. I paid the $3 by check. I copied the check. And then I did the thing I had been waiting almost a year to have a clean reason to do. I sent the association a written request by certified mail for the financial records that every homeowner in our state has a legal right to inspect. The annual budgets, the bank statements, the board meeting minutes, the reserve study, the management contract, all of it. Here is what I want you to understand. I did not send that request because of $3. I sent it because $3 was the smallest, cleanest, most documented provocation I could ask for. And a man who is about to look closely at someone's books wants the reason on the record to be small and petty and impossible to spin. Diane had given me that reason in writing, with her signature on it. She thought she was collecting a fine. She was handing me a key. The request went out on a Monday. Under our state statute, the association had 10 business days to respond. On the 8th day, I received a letter, signed by Diane, informing me that the records were not available for inspection because my account was delinquent in the amount of $3, and that delinquent members forfeited the right to inspect association documents until the balance was cured. I read that letter 3 times. Then I laughed, alone in my workshop, because I had just watched a woman put in writing that she would withhold legally mandated financial disclosures over a $3 mailbox fine. I filed the letter. It was the most valuable piece of paper I had collected in 11 years. I paid the $3 again, a second time, certified, with a cover letter noting that the prior payment had cleared on a date I cited and a check number I cited, and renewing my request for the records. I wanted no ambiguity. I wanted the account current beyond any argument, and I wanted the refusal, if it came again, to stand naked with no excuse under it. The refusal came again. This time the letter said the records request was overly broad and burdensome, and that the board would consider it at its next regular meeting. which was scheduled for 2 months out. 2 months. For documents that by statute were due in 10 business days. I added that letter to the folder. The folder was getting thick. I should tell you about the deputy because he matters. His name was Sam Pruitt, and he was a sheriff's deputy who lived 4 houses down with a blue heeler named Biscuit that Mia adored. Sam was a big, calm man in his 40s who worked nights and slept days, and he had gotten his own notices more than most. Because his work truck sat in his driveway at odd hours and his schedule did not match the Covenant's idea of a tidy street. A boat in his driveway, $30. A fence stain Diane called non-conforming, $20. A flag bracket mounted an inch too far from the door, $10. He had paid them all, grumbling the way most people do, because most people would rather pay $40 than spend a Saturday fighting a clipboard, and a deputy especially does not want a reputation as the neighbor who fights the HOA. One evening late that summer, Sam came by the workshop while Mia was throwing a tennis ball for Biscuit in the backyard, the dog tearing low circles through the grass the way heelers do. Sam leaned in the workshop doorway with a can of soda and watched me file a letter, and he asked me, half joking, whether I thought the whole HOA was a racket. I told him I did not know yet. I told him I had asked for the books and been refused twice in writing. Sam got quiet then, and he set the soda down on the bench, and the joking went out of his voice. He said he had pulled a lot of complaints in his years on the job, neighbors against neighbors, and that he had learned one thing that he wished more people understood. A complaint that something is wrong is just noise, he said. A document that proves it is evidence. Build the document. I told him I was working on it, that I had a folder getting thick. He nodded at the binder on the bench and said, "When you have it, do not take it to the board. Take it to the county. The board is the problem. You do not hand your evidence to the people you are building it against." I wrote that down that night, word for word, on the legal pad I kept by the bed, because it was the cleanest piece of advice anyone had given me in 11 years, and because a careful man keeps even the things people say out loud. The escalation widened after that, the way it always does when a careful owner stops being quiet and starts asking for paper. In August, Diane sent a notice that my workshop, which had stood 11 years and which the county had permitted before Ellen and I ever moved in, was an unpermitted structure, and that I would be fined $25 a day until I produced a permit or removed it. She delivered that one in person too on a Saturday morning, and she stood on the walk and said, "The board has determined that the structure is non-compliant, and until you can demonstrate otherwise, it accrues daily." I asked her if she had checked the county records. She said, "The burden is on the owner, Mr. Voss, not on the association." I went inside and pulled the stamped permit from the folder, 11 years old, the county seal right there in the corner, and I sent it to her the same afternoon with a one-line cover letter noting the permit number and the date of issue. She did not acknowledge it. The daily fines posted anyway, $25 a day accruing on my account, which I now understood was the entire point of the exercise. The account was the weapon. A delinquent account suspended your vote at meetings. It barred your records request, as she had already shown me in writing. And under the covenant, a delinquent balance that crossed a threshold could support a lien on the house itself, and a lien left long enough could be foreclosed. Diane was not collecting money from me. She had stopped pretending the fines were about trash cans. She was building a balance she could one day foreclose on, and the workshop fine, $25 a day with no honest basis, was how you build a balance fast. That was the autumn I started reading the public records, the ones she could not withhold because they were not hers to withhold. I drove to the county building on a Wednesday, the slow day at the recorder's counter, And I sat at the public terminal with a roll of quarters for the printer, and I started pulling everything filed against and around the 6 rear lots on my side of the lane. County property filings, the state corporate registry, recorded plats. I worked the way I had worked 100 audits, oldest to newest, following the money in the paper and never skipping a page, because the page you skip is always the one that mattered. And what I found there turned a petty tyrant into something with a motive. And a motive changes everything, because a motive tells you how far a person will go. Halpern Land Partners, Ron's company. 18 months earlier, it had purchased the 40-acre parcel of undeveloped woodland that bordered the rear of Cedar Hollow, the strip of timber behind my workshop and behind the 6 lots on my side of the lane. I printed the deed. Then I found the preliminary plat Ron had filed with the county planning office, a 40-unit expansion of Cedar Hollow onto that parcel. And I printed all 11 pages of it, and I spread them on the workshop bench under the lamp. And there it was. The access road for the 40 new units on the filed plat ran directly through the rear easement of the 6 existing lots on my side, including mine. To build his road, Ron needed those 6 rear easements. He could buy them, which meant buying or fighting 6 families. Or he could drive 6 owners into HOA delinquency, lien the properties through the association his wife controlled, and acquire what he needed through foreclosure at a fraction of the cost. I sat there a long time with the lamp on and the plat unrolled and Biscuit asleep under the bench. And I understood finally that the mailbox fine was not pettiness and had never been pettiness. It was the opening move of a land grab, and I happened to own one of the 6 squares on the board. I want to be careful here, because I am an accountant and not a novelist, and I do not state things I cannot source. I did not learn Ron's intent from a confession or a wiretap or a slip at a cocktail party. I deduced it from public filings, each of which I printed and dated and added to the folder, and each of which a neutral stranger could read in the same order I read them and reach the same conclusion without my help. The plat was public. The easement lines on it were public. The 40-acre purchase was public. The corporate registry was public. Diane had counted on no one ever connecting them, because in a 100-home association, almost no one ever reads anything. And the 1-page budget had worked on everyone for years. She had not counted on an auditor who read everything for a living, sitting in the 3rd house on the lane, keeping receipts in a manila folder, because a dead man's habits do not die when he retires. By the following spring, the folder had become a binder, and the binder had become 3 binders, and Mia, now 14, had built an index. We had every notice, every fine, every check, every refusal, the permit, the plat, the easement filings, the corporate registry pages, and a timeline that ran 4 years. I had also, by then, obtained the one thing Diane had fought hardest to keep from me, and I had obtained it not from her, but from the bank. Here is how. Our state allows any member of a nonprofit corporation to petition for records, but it also allows a party in a civil filing to subpoena financial institutions in the ordinary course of the case. So I stopped asking Diane for the books, because Diane was never going to hand me the books, and I went around her. I filed a small claims action against the association for the statutory penalty owed when an HOA unlawfully withholds records from a member, a penalty that in our state runs $500 plus costs. It was a small case. The filing fee was less than the fines I had already paid. I filled out the form at the county clerk's window with Mia beside me, and she asked why we were suing for only $500 when the real number was so much bigger. And I told her the truth, which is that the $500 was not the point and never had been. The case was a doorway. Filing it gave me standing as a party to active litigation, to request the association's bank records directly from the bank through the court, bypassing Diane and her clipboard and her 2-month delays entirely. The subpoena went to the bank in March. The bank, which had no loyalty to Diane and a great deal of respect for a court order, complied in 3 weeks, and on a Thursday afternoon in my workshop, with the lamp on and Mia reading over my shoulder and Biscuit asleep under the bench, I opened 4 years of Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association bank statements, the actual statements, every deposit and every withdrawal. And I finally saw the whole shape of the thing I had been feeling under my boots for 11 years. It was worse than I expected, and I expected a great deal. I worked it the way I would have worked any engagement, with a fresh legal pad and a column for inflows and a column for outflows. And I let the numbers tell me the story, instead of telling them what I wanted to hear. The association collected roughly $48,000 a year in dues from 100 homes. Over 4 years, that was just under $192,000, plus the fines, which across all the harassed owners on the lane came to another $31,000. Call it $200,000 to $23,000 that had flowed into the operating account across 4 years. That was the inflow column, and it was clean and steady, and exactly what you would expect. The outflow column was where the curtain came down. Month after month, in the same amount on roughly the same day, a payment went out to a management company called Hollow Cedar Services. $1,800 a month, every month, for landscaping, administration, and reserve management. I sat with that name a while. Hollow Cedar Services. Cedar Hollow reversed, the way a man names a shell company when he thinks he is being clever and is only being lazy. I ran the name through the state registry that same night. Its registered agent was Ronald Halpern. Its business address was the office of Halpern Land Partners, the same office 2 towns over, the same man who waved from the SUV and never got out. The management company was the husband. The management company had been paid $86,200 over 4 years for landscaping and maintenance. That, when I drove the property the next morning and photographed every common area with the date stamp on, had visibly not been done. The entrance beds were weeds. The retention pond was silted in. The common fence was the same fence that had been failing when Ellen was alive. Then I found the reserve. Every honest association keeps a reserve account. Money set aside for the big repairs that come once a decade, the roads and the roofs and the drainage, funded a little each month so that no single year breaks the membership. The Cedar Hollow Reserve, for 100 homes with private roads, should have held somewhere near $100,000. I found the reserve account on the statements. It held $411. The reserve had been drained, transfer by transfer, into the operating account and out again to Hollow Cedar Services, and from there into Ron's development. Diane was not skimming a little off the top the way a tired treasurer sometimes does. She was funneling the entire association, dues and fines and reserve alike, into her husband's company, and the looting and the land grab were not 2 schemes. They were one machine with 2 outputs, and the fines on my mailbox were the small visible gear at the front of it. I did not call the board. Sam had told me not to, and Sam was right. I called the county. The reveal did not happen on my front walk, and it did not happen in a shouting match at a meeting. It happened at the annual Cedar Hollow homeowners meeting in May, in the rented fellowship hall of the church on the county road. Because that was the one room where every owner and a quorum and the public could all be present at once. I had spent 4 years making sure the moment would be public, neutral, and documented, and now it was. I asked for and was granted 5 minutes on the agenda, which Diane could not refuse because the records request litigation had made me, in her lawyer's words, a person whose exclusion would look like exactly what it was. Diane opened the meeting the way she always did. In the magenta blazer, sunglasses pushed up on the crown of her head, though the hall had no sun in it. Reading the treasurer's report off a single page. The same kind of single page that had hung yellowing on my nail for years. She announced a healthy operating balance and a well-funded reserve. And she thanked the membership for their compliance with community standards. And a few people clapped, because a few people always clap. Then she called my name with a thin smile and said the floor was mine for 5 minutes. And she said for the whole room to hear, that she hoped I would keep my comments brief and relevant, and not waste everyone's evening with personal grievances about a mailbox. It was the third time, by my count, that she had said some version of that line in public, in a different setting each time, and I had the other 2 on paper in the folder. She had given me my 3 voiced moments without ever knowing she was building my case for me. I did not give a speech. I have heard a lot of men give speeches at the people who wronged them, and the speeches never land the way the men imagine, because a speech is just a louder complaint, and a complaint is only noise. Documents land. I set 3 binders on the table at the front of the hall, squared the edges, and opened the top one. Then I asked the county official I had invited, a woman from the Consumer Fraud Division named Paula Reyes, whether she would read aloud one figure from the reserve account, the current balance, which I had subpoenaed from the bank and which sat in a tabbed sleeve in front of her. The room went still in the way rooms do when they sense something turning. Diane stood up and said this was out of order, that the agenda did not permit it, that Ms. Reyes had no standing here. The official did not look at Diane. She looked at the statement and she said, "The reserve balance is $411. Then I asked her to read the amount paid over 4 years to Hollow Cedar Services, and she said, $86,200. And then I asked her to read the name of the registered agent of Hollow Cedar Services, and she said, Ronald Halpern. And I asked her to read the name of the president who had signed every check, and she said, Diane Halpern. And then nobody said anything at all, for what felt like a long time, while 100 neighbors did the arithmetic that I had done alone in my workshop the Thursday before, and turned, one face at a time, gets in the slow way a room turns, to look at the woman in the magenta blazer who had fined them for their trash cans and their hose hooks while emptying their reserve into her husband's company. Diane did not deflate the way I had imagined across 4 years. She got louder. She said the figures were taken out of context, that the management fees were standard, that the reserve had been reallocated for an upcoming project, that I was a disgruntled man who had been cited for legitimate violations and was now attacking the association out of spite over $3. And the county official, who did not work for Diane and did not care about the blazer, said quietly that the records had been subpoenaed lawfully, that they would now be part of an open investigation, and that no one should destroy or alter any association document. That was when Diane stopped talking. Not because she was ashamed, because she finally understood that the room she controlled was no longer hers. I will give you the paired numbers, because they are the heart of it. In 4 years, I had been fined a grand total that came to $63 across all the petty notices, every one of which I had paid, on time, by check, leaving a balance owed of exactly 0. Across those same 4 years, Diane and Ron had moved $86,000 out of the association and left $411 in a reserve that should have held $100,000. $63 in fines on one side, against $86,000 in self-dealing on the other. She had built her whole machine to lean a man over $3, and the $3 was the thread that unspooled all of it. The consequence was not something I did to her. It was something she had built over 4 years and that finally arrived on its own schedule. The county fraud investigation froze the association's operating account within the week, which is the detail in the title and the detail I find most fitting of all. Because the very account she had used as a weapon, the account where she parked the dues and the fines and the looted reserve and ran it all out to her husband, was the account the state locked down first. Every dollar she had funneled through it became evidence the moment the freeze posted. And evidence is a thing you cannot spend. The $1,800 payments stopped. The transfers stopped. The whole machine seized in place with its books open on a county desk. The 40-unit expansion died with it. Ron could not get construction financing with a fraud hold on his management company and an open county investigation into the access road on his plat. And no bank writes a development loan into the middle of that. Without the financing, there was no road. And without the road, there was no expansion. And the 6 rear easements he had schemed 4 years to acquire. The easements that were the whole reason a man fines his neighbor $3 for a mailbox stayed exactly where they had always been, recorded against our 6 houses, ours. The thing they tried to take by emptying our account was lost in the same motion that emptied it. Because the emptying is what turned the account into evidence, and the evidence is what froze the land. She reached for the 6 squares, and the reach itself is what cost her the board. Diane resigned from the board the day after the meeting, by email, 2 lines, citing personal reasons. She did not stand on anyone's walk again. The state ordered a full forensic audit of 4 years of association records, the real audit, the 10 or 15-page kind, by an independent firm with no connection to anyone named Halpern. A new board was elected within the month. Ordinary owners, a retired teacher and a plumber, and a young couple from the far end of the lane. And the first thing the new board did was hire a real management company and a real auditor. The second thing it did, at the suggestion of a 14-year-old who had built the index and asked to address the board for 2 minutes and got them, was vote to refund every fine collected during the Halpern years to the owners who had paid them. I got my $63 back in a check signed by the retired teacher. Mia framed it and hung it on the nail above my workbench, where the 1-page budget used to be. I want to tell you about the evening it ended, because that is the part I keep. Mia was 15 by then, the summer after the meeting, and she was in the back garden with Biscuit, and the daylilies Ellen had planted were blooming along the front walk, the same flowers Diane had stood on, and nobody was standing on them. Mia called to me from the garden that Biscuit had dug a hole again and asked what she should do about it, and I told her to fill it in and not make a federal case out of a dog and a hole. She laughed. The house was not too quiet anymore. I sat on the back step with a cup of coffee, and I thought about Ellen, who would have hated every minute of the fight and loved exactly how it ended, with the flowers blooming and the land still ours and the girl in the garden. And I let the binder stay closed on the workbench where it belonged. Here is the lesson, plainly, because it is the reason I told you all of this. If you live under an association, you have rights you are probably not using. Rights written into your state statute that no board can vote away. You have the right to inspect the books, the bank statements, the meeting minutes, the reserve study, and the management contract. And in most states, they have a short legal deadline, often 10 business days, to hand them over. Send the request in writing, certified mail, and keep the green return card, because the card is proof you asked and proof of the day you asked. If they refuse, the refusal is worth more than the records. So keep the refusal letter and treat it like gold. Keep every notice, every fine, every check, every letter, in a folder with a date on the tab, because a complaint is noise and a document is evidence. And the difference between the two is the difference between losing and winning. Read the public filings, the plats and the property records, and the corporate registry down at the county building, because the motive is almost always sitting in plain sight in a public office, where some self-important person assumed no one would ever bother to look. And do not get angry, whatever they do on your walk, because angry people make mistakes and careful people keep receipts. The smallest, pettiest fine they ever write, you might turn out to be the cleanest reason you will ever have to open the books. If you have ever paid a fine you knew was wrong just to make someone go away, tell me about it in the comments, because I read them and I learned from them. Subscribe if you want to hear how these things actually end. With documents and not with shouting. And next time, I will tell you about a man who was fined for the color of his barn and discovered, when he pulled the covenant, that the woman fining him did not legally own the road she was standing on. Keep your receipts. I will see you then.